Many of you will know that I have for the past 10 years chaired Modeling World, the older brother and sister of this event. The objective of Modeling World, and I think also the objective of this event, is to share knowledge, but also to challenge our current thinking, to celebrate successes that we are achieving, and to do that by engaging everybody in the room. So I hope that we can achieve that with this session. So that's the challenge for the panel. The panel consists of 3 people that have earned the right to be there. From your left, Afion Jenkins, who is Program Director here at the Transport Systems Catapult. Richard Romano, who's Chair in Driving Simulation at the Institute for Transport Studies in Leeds. And Ian Williams, who in yesterday's world was Director at WSP and Marshall Econ Partners, and in today's world is an independent consultant. And whatever you will be in tomorrow's world, Ian. So this is a panel around how we move forward from this event to actually to capture the energy that we created today and the interest that obviously is out there. And I'm going to try and stimulate a discussion and, that later on I will want you to engage in by asking the panel a few pertinent questions around their own areas of interest and expertise. But I want to start off with actually asking them, and also for you to think about what the key light bulb moment was today at today's event, and the key thing that you are going to take away tonight and hopefully are going to use in your work tomorrow. Afion, can I start with you?
Okay, can you hear me? So a few things, I think, in terms of takeaways. So in what I've heard today, is there needs to be a sandbox of some sort, so an area or a space for collaborative development. I think we need a place where we can experiment and quickly move through the process of testing, both we've talked a lot about virtual environments, but also the physical environment. So we need to move through that process increasingly faster, and I'm not sure we've quite got that yet, and it's something that's a takeaway for me as our role as a Catapult. How do we go about doing that? And I'm all ears for kind of support and collaboration in that area. Other takeaways, so data and integration is a key element, and how do we go about doing that? There's been a couple of things that have been mentioned, technologies that we've been looking at to explore how do we integrate these huge data sets going forward. So Richard mentioned high-level architecture, which we need to continue to press into that. Is that an option going forward to bring all of that together? And then other products such as Improbables and others that could help us to integrate these huge data sets going forward. And I think that is absolutely the key to understanding the future scenarios and outcomes going forward.
Richard?
All right. I really enjoyed today's presentations. I think the thing I came away with most was mobility as a service and how hard it's going to be to model that. Just listening to the excellent presentations, and Rachel and James and Klaus and Robin all presented different aspects of mobility as a service. And it's going to be tough because although maybe it's easy to sit there and say, well, here's what I think of as an optimal service, and I'll implement that in my modeling software and show how well it works. Each company is going to come at it with their own branding of what is a good service, and so then what are the KPIs and what are they trying to achieve? And Rachel was talking, I thought, really interestingly about how does mobility as a service, does it replace public transit? Does it augment it? So there's a lot of different solutions, possible solutions, and trading off between them and deciding what's the appropriate model, I think, is going to be really difficult. So that's what I'm going to be thinking about.
Good, thank you. Ian?
I found it very interesting today because it provided me with a lot of information on the more technical aspects of things, which I was less familiar with before we started. But I think there are a few aspects which are worth picking out. And one was the importance of context when we're modeling, which Rick had picked up. It's important that I understand lots of people here will be very keen to focus on the technology, on the sort of interesting side of things. But we've got to also look at the wider picture in which this technology will be used. And we need to look at, the longer term, how the world will have evolved by the time this is in use. And picking up particularly on that, one of the points Rachel made was about the management of quality and quantity of movement. And I think here there's an area which is to do with the pricing and how prices will change in the future, and a whole series of things which are tied up with the technology, which we need to think more about in the future. And maybe we'll have a chance to talk more about that in the discussion, but I'll leave it for now.
Good. Thanks, Ian. So moving on to sort of some of the questions that I have got for you, particularly around the way in which we organise today and the way in which we hope to move forward. So, Afion, if I can start with you. Tomorrow's Society, this morning's session, what are the main challenges, in your view, that we are facing with modelling and that we actually can do something about?
Okay, I guess there are a few barriers. So I think a couple of years ago at the Transport Systems Catapult, our starting point was to evaluate with all of you where we're at as an industry and how we're working in terms of what we have right now, and also evaluating where we could see things going around mobility as a service and autonomous vehicles and everything else that we've been talking about, these new business models. And I think the first outcomes of that were a few things I've already mentioned. So data and data integration is a real barrier, I think, within modelling. And at the moment, being able to stitch together a pedestrian model with a highways model and moving through the different strategic models to the microsimul models is very, I think there's a real barrier there to helping us to better understand societal changes. The other key element, which is evident in the investment that we've made around visualization and virtual reality. So I think we spend, as a public, we spend an awful lot of money on modeling cities and different scenarios. And I really believe that we can get more value out of the investment that we're putting in through increased visualization and actually putting the tools or developing the tools that key stakeholders could actually understand in a more immersive and more effective way. And I think we've got to do better at translating the mathematical models into more powerful visual tools for the people who are making the decisions ultimately to understand and to make the right decisions.
Thank you. Richard, you're not a traditional transport modeler, unlike many of us in the room. So what do you think, looking back at your career and what you know about other fields, what are the main opportunities that exist outside our transport modeling field as we know it now, that we should be using and should be exploring to forecast tomorrow's world better?
Yeah, I think actually some of the presentations today made me very happy because people were talking about model-based design. And I think that's a really important aspect of any modeling and simulation. Simulation is kind of a test environment. And if we can work through that testing with design variables and then work out basically this response surface of whatever it is, capacity, performance, then we can start to have a connected model and make some design decisions based on that. I think that is important, and it's nice to see it coming along. I think one of the other things that is going to become very important is the whole concept of model management. And coming from the auto industry, when I worked for Continental Tevis about just over 20 years ago, and it was just at the time where the auto companies were starting to require every supplier that came in with a powertrain, with a brake system, whatever it was, they had to show up both with a physical system and a model to integrate. And I think that this type of model management is going to become very important. So if you want to run your new autonomous vehicle service in our city, you need to come in and provide a model of it that we can integrate. And then actually the other piece of that is the overall model management for each of the cities. There are some excellent city presentations and combined authority type presentations here today, which I loved. But there's such a challenge to have that type of capability across all the UK, and then within each one to maintain those models. And I think one of the aspects as you look over the last 15 years in other communities is this concept of simulation as a service. So being able to have these simulations in the cloud and defining constructive interfaces between them so that everyone can be managing their own models, pushing them forward, and the end user can just use the integration system.
Excellent. Some food for thought there for the catapult, I'm sure. Ian, finally, this was about tomorrow's world, and we've done some soul searching around how good our models are at actually forecasting what might happen in tomorrow's world. Is what we've got totally useless, or what do you think the legacy value is of the tools that we use today for predicting tomorrow's world?
They've certainly had a checkered record, but I think they're far from being useless. I think one of the things that will be needed is a reasonably strong behavioral structure to the models we're using. The sort of extrapolation from a matrix forward into the future is going to be unhelpful in a situation where the technology changes completely and the pricing of that technology changes radically. However, I think there are useful things that we can take from our current modeling toolkit, and I'll just look at two that I think are important. And here I'm looking not at modeling the transition from the present to the future, which is tricky, and I'm stepping back from that tricky bit, but just looking more into the future. What will things be like when calves are the norm? And I think the transition will be quite quick. Exactly when it happens is less clear. One of the things we can look at is if politicians said, can you solve congestion? Possibly you can. If you have within urban areas the sort of yield management that you have within the airlines, where people are charged on the basis of capacity with some fairly simple ideas, that the charge is on the basis of how many other people you're keeping away from the road. So you have the situation in airlines, people get used to paying 20 times as much if they want to travel home at Christmas as they would if they want to travel home in February. People accept it, they don't like it, but keeps fares down. If you were to say, well, we want to use the roads that we've paid for very expensively as efficiently as possible, then there are charging mechanisms. You have to be careful about them. You don't want to make people, as happened in London, the congestion charging did real violence to the state of health of people. The number of disabled people in London grew very rapidly once you had the advent of cards that would get you through to the centre if you were disabled. So we need to be a bit careful about the details. The other one tied up with that, and it's something that wasn't picked up today but is crucial. The government currently are talking about building 1 million houses by 2020. It would be great if they did. Those houses need to go somewhere. Just look at the cities at the moment. You have certain cities, Swindon, Peterborough, Milton Keynes, are very successful. They were designed for the car, and by and large, they cater for cars reasonably well. You have other cities that are equally successful, Cambridge, Oxford, Inner London. All of these are growing very rapidly. They were not designed for the car. They have effectively rejected the car. Car transport into central London now is 1/3 of what it was back in 1982. Other ways have been developed. So what I'm saying is transport and land use are intimately linked, and we should be looking at what sort of cities should we be developing now? How should we be developing urban structure so that when the transport system is completely different, we will have cities that are suitable for that new transport system. And that's a modelling task that can't be ignored.
Excellent point to finish that element off. So there's some salient points being made by the panel, and they're nicely warmed up for you. So are there any questions that either you have for the panel or any observations you've got around where we move from here as a profession in terms of modelling tomorrow's world? Just to double check, are there any questions online? Who's managing those? No, I can't see a thing. Oh, you've even got the mic. Paul, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Paul Hode, Highways England. You've touched on it, I think, already. Just thinking, we've seen the idea that we could increase capacity of roads with autonomous vehicles, but is there the potential for a significant generation of additional trips that will compensate or overcompensate for this additional capacity? That a barrier for young drivers is the insurance for cars if you're in an autonomous vehicle. Obviously, that's not a barrier. So could there suddenly be a step change in trip making that might then ultimately need management just to stop this excessive demand damaging our roads rather than this being a solution?
Yes, is the simple answer. There will be. It's very simple. If you think about people getting access to shared vehicles in an effective fashion, the cost of having access to a car, I won't say owning a car, because owning a car in urban areas may become rather pointless. If you're sharing a vehicle, and if you're living in an urban area, one can assume that at a reasonable price, everyone would have access to vehicles more or less when they want them. So if cars become much cheaper to use, then people will use them more. You may have equal benefits for public transport. You may be able to find other ways that make them equally attractive. But basically, it should, according to what we've seen in the past, lead to much more demand. But again, it's a question, fuel is currently taxed. Why not have some tax on mobility if that is deemed necessary? But I would see that charging for the use of capacity should become the norm. In the past, it was so awkward and so disruptive, it wasn't worth doing. In the future, it's hard to see why people wouldn't be charged for the road space that they use and charged more when there is capacity restriction because too many people want to use it. And that way, currently we have rationing by congestion. If you build 5 times as many roads in central London, it would be equally congested. You don't build them, there's not a great point to building them. In that way, I think you have to have some form of rationing, and price of other tweaks may be as good as rationing by congestion.
I see a hand over there. Who's got the mic?
I think I'm jumping in, but anyway, Lawrence Gtalk, Mark MacDonald. There's been quite a lot of talk today about using models as a way to measure mobility as a service once it's come. Is there room for modelling to be used as an optimization tool to look at how these systems can be best implemented rather than sort of post-optimization and modelling the actual system once it's in place? That wasn't aimed at anyone in particular.
No.
But,
Okay,
It takes up the challenge.
But yeah, well, I think it's a bit of both. I think, as I mentioned before, it's an iterative process of data feeding through the loop, where we're going to have increasing amounts of real-time data, as has been mentioned in a number of the presentations, How do we ingest that real-time information into our models? How do we then have I guess, an offline version of that where we can play and experiment and try to find other optimized strategies, and then feed that into our traffic signal timings or whatever. So it's this iterative loop I see of real-time data going in, having an offline version of a model, a predictive platform of some sort, that you can then look at different techniques and then feed it through once you're happy into the city, and then learn and then go through again. So I think increasingly that's where it will move towards, I think.
Yes, just to jump in there for a second as well. I think if you come up with some level of demand, then maybe you can start to look at how the competitive nature is going to impact and what different, like I'm thinking kind of game theory type approaches of trying to lay out multiple companies competing for this mass type activity, and then seeing how they interact together, whether some of them are die off because they can't compete, and kind of what ends up coming out in the end.
Good. That was another question right there. Oh, you've even got the mic.
Simon Clulo from Clulo Consulting, Transport Planning. My understanding of the National Travel Survey is that historically people have had time budget for travelling, which has remained pretty constant. I was wondering what the panel thought in tomorrow's world, whether people's time budget will increase with the variety of transport modes available, decrease, stay the same, or perhaps we may even define our time when we're travelling as something different.
An interesting question. I suspect it could go either way, in the sense that you will have, on the one hand, if people are in autonomous vehicles and can do other things, then they may view time spent travelling as time not wasted, in the sense that it is viewed now in the official assessment procedures as time savings of a value. The value of that may become much less, so people may be prepared to spend more time travelling. But then on the other hand, there are all the other changes in communication which may lessen many of the perceived needs to travel. So it may continue on with the miraculous, reasonably constant budget that for a time, which has been there since the 70s, which is an important concept, certainly in the past, for getting models to behave sensibly.
Okay. I'm going to take, we've got one there, and then I'm going to finish off here, because we're going to stick to time.
Anan Alos Atkins. One comment. I think both Frick and Louis were saying that we need to have more of stress testing and scenario testing than model development. Totally agree with the principle, but without a robust model, you can't, the stress testing will not make a lot of sense. Obviously, with lots of projects, we spend so much time on surveys and CalVal that we don't have enough time for the much more important stage of testing scenarios. The key question to me, we need to sell CAV not just like the best thing since sliced bread. We need to be, as Dewey Williamson was saying, we need to say the pluses and minuses. I haven't heard any negatives with the CAV. My main concern, as you say, Ian, it'll be much easier to use CAV. I can read the paper or send my emails, and I don't need to park. It's like a personalized taxi and immediately available. It'll make car travel much easier and therefore impact, I think, potentially detrimentally on mode choice. Unless, as Rachel said, if it's a sort of like the first and last mile, and then the rest of the journey continues by PT. That is a concern that I think, and maybe maybe a clue to resolving that is to have the cabs with a certain limited charge, so that you can't go from the suburbs to central London using cab. It just needs to be access and egress modes, for example.
I take that as a comment. Hugh, last point here.
Yeah, I apologise since I've already spoken quite a bit. I've just had a thought, which is I wonder if we're dealing with this the wrong way round. That what we actually have here is a latent demand of how people would like to live their lives and within that travel. And what we could be seeing here is tools that go some way towards allowing them to achieve that, in the way that the internet, unexpectedly somewhat, has allowed people to live their lives differently, shop differently, find things out differently, etc., etc. And you wouldn't have predicted it the way it was. But I'm wondering whether we need to think about how would people like to behave? And then rather than say, what will calves do, what will Maz do, how will those things enable people to get there? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I like your thinking, and everybody can think about it and talk about it over a beer, what you think. Will you please join me in thanking the panel? And the last word is to Afion about where we're going to take things from here, and maybe a few words of thanks.
Okay, so thank you all for being here today. Thank you for giving your time, for contributing in. Our role as the Trans-Pacific Catapult, part of our role is to facilitate collaboration with all parts of the transportation industry. And I think it's increasingly important as we're talking about all of the disruption. So we're here to support and help the industry through the transition process. So that's the key thing to say. We want to collaborate, and I've got a great team at Trans-Pacific Catapult, and we want to work with everybody within the room, if possible, over time. What is great, actually, is that I've had conversations with many of you over the last 2 years, and it's fantastic to get everybody together and to be hearing all of the fantastic work that's going on. So that's great. So thank yous, lots of thank yous to the speakers. We've had fantastic presentations throughout the day, so just tremendous. So thank you very much for everything that you shared through that. To our sponsors and exhibitors, so hopefully you've had a chance to view all of the stands. Our caterers, we had a fantastic meal, and we've been fed well and had coffee at the right times to keep us awake. The audiovisual team and the guys who've been putting it out onto the web, so thank you very much. To Debbie, so if you haven't had a chance yet, before you go, do take a look at the fantastic artwork. So everything on the canvas here we'll capture and we'll distribute that to everybody. So it's a fantastic aid memoir of what we've talked about through the day. So yeah, do take a look if you haven't already. And Hugh, a special mention for Hugh as well. So Hugh and myself have been working on the content and pulling it all together. So big thank yous to Hugh to helping develop today's programme. And finally to the rest of the Transport System Catapult team in the background who've been doing a lot of running around to make sure that this event runs as smoothly as it had done today. So yeah, now time for a beer, refreshments. So it's back through where lunch was. So if you have time, hopefully you do, then it was a good time to network. Thank you very much.